Hi, everyone. I'm going to do a presentation I put together, and this presentation is actually about my journey over the last 2.5 years working for a cloud company. It's more of a rant than anything else. It really, I hope if there's anything you take away from this session is some tips in respect to if you're thinking about building your own private cloud, or you're a services company thinking about building a private cloud for your customers. For me, you'll see I'll go through some of the challenges in detail, and this is going to be a warts and all session, right? So I'm going to lay it out all on the table. I'm going to be 100% truthful, but there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? Can I ask a question? Is there anyone from EMC or VMware in the audience? Hands up. Great, that means I can be 100% truthful. Actually, before I kick off, guys, look, I want to make this as interactive as possible. Please ask me questions. That's how I feel comfortable, if you ask me questions. Heckling's okay as well. My brother's over there, he loves to heckle me all day long. Boo, yeah. And actually, kind of like, you know, heckling, asking questions, gives it a family kind of vibe, and that's what I like, right? The other side of it is, I kind of had to bribe people to come here today because I'm up against some top contenders. I don't know if you noticed that people like Frank Denenham from Pernix Data is presenting at the same time. So my plan to get people here was to get some gifts, right? I have an awful lot of giveaways here, which include mice from Veeam Software, iPhone holders from Unitrans, and I have some free licenses, real licenses, of a piece of technology called Remote Desktop Manager. Anyone ever heard of that before? Who uses that? Absolutely irrelevant to this discussion. However, they gave me some. Yes, you use it in the back? Yeah. Right, so irrelevant to this discussion, but they're here, right? I don't have enough for everyone, and I'll just dish them out to people who ask me trick questions and try to catch me out. Right? That's my plan. Okay, let's get into it. This is the agenda. I'm just going to do a quick introduction of who I am, what we do as an organization. I'll tell you about my organization. By the way, look, we're not sponsoring this event, so I had rules about doing this session, and the rules are you can't make it a sales pitch, Ricky. And you'll see that this is not a sales pitch, right? Because I'm going to tell you everything, warts and all. But I'm going to tell you what we do, the challenges that we've had, what I've had, what actually happened, what the big picture is, what's the next things for us, and so on and so on. If you don't know me, I can see a lot of people in the room. I probably know 50% of the people anyway, or just met new people today as well, right? If you don't know me, I'm Ricky Qasem. I'm the Chief Technologist for Canopy Cloud. Canopy is, hands up if you've heard of Canopy before. Well, Dave's just got a job there, so he starts on December the 1st, right? Can't wait for that, Dave. Again, hands up. Okay, so for the guys who've not heard of Canopy, we're a joint venture between Atos, EMC, and VMware. So that is why I asked if there was any VMware or EMC folk in the room, right? Okay? So I have to be very mindful about what I say and how I say it. But again, I still want to make this a warts and all session. My background is, well, I've been working in IT actually for 21 years, but working with VMware for 14 years. My claim to fame is I think there's still a support request on VMware system dating 2001. I was one of the first guys to work for Veeam Software. I was one of the first VMware instructors in the EMEA, right? Yeah, I've got some claims to fame. Right? I'm bragging now, I'm sorry. But that's me in a nutshell. I don't think I'm technical anymore, but people seem to prove me wrong now and again. I seem to be able to come back into the technical side of the business more often than not. So, this presentation really is about one of the things I'm responsible for in Canopy. And I joined Canopy about 2.5 years ago. And again, Canopy was this joint venture which was formed 2.5 years ago. I came from, you saw my experience, I came from the vendor land. I worked for Veeam Software, Liquidware Labs, and so on and so on. So coming to a cloud company that was backed by a very, I don't want to use the word legacy, but a very mature managed services company like Atos, right, was a massive culture shock for me. My first remit, and this was an order from my boss, was, Ricky, design as a private cloud, right? And so I sat down, and on the back of a fag packet, I designed a private cloud. I had some rules, and one of those rules was to keep the parent organizations happy. So whatever I did, I had to base it on technology from EMC, VMware, and services from Atos. Now, I'd kind of looked at other private cloud services that Atos had and other companies were selling, and I kind of realized that private cloud is a bit of a vague statement, right? Yeah? Because a lot of people tout private cloud as nothing more than infrastructure plus virtualization. But actually, when you start to look at the NIST definition, for example, of what private cloud is or what cloud is, there are characteristics that are expected from a private cloud solution. So before I started going away and actually designing what our private cloud solution would look like, I put these things, these characteristics, to the forefront of everything that I was doing. So it had to be self-service, segmentation, automation, rapid deployment, and elastic as well. From a high-level perspective, and actually I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds later throughout this presentation, but I kind of need to tell you something up front. When we start to talk about the technicalities of this solution, actually I can't take credit for it because I'm just the high-level guy, the guy who conceptualized it. I still went through a lot of challenges to make it a reality, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But trust me, there's an army of people, designers, architects, the Daves of this world, yeah, who've actually made this a reality, right? My responsibility to get all those people together and put all these components together to make this private cloud solution was really to draw out a high-level architecture of what this private cloud solution would look like. And it meant actually composing building blocks that were, what's the word I'm looking for, that were backed by technology to meet the requirements that people would expect from a private cloud solution. So it included things like patching, compliance, a cloud layer for elasticity, networking components, backup, and then a few things that I really didn't think about as well, because I didn't, previously I'd come from a software company which was all about point products and not a managed services company. So the things that I didn't really think about were the management aspect of this solution, right? So ticketing, change management, reporting, these are the things that customers want to see from a solution that is sold as a service. So if it wasn't clear what I was actually trying to get across about this private cloud solution is what we're doing with it is selling it as a service. Again, I'm sorry, I have to be mindful that this is not a sales session. And I don't want to spend too much time on that. So I got this fag packet, and I drew out this high-level architecture, and I said, these are the things, these are the features and the functions that we want. What are the products that are going to meet these requirements? For us, being Canopy, again, we have to go to market with the EMC and VMware technology, so I had to pick products from VMware and EMC. We have an alliance with this company called VCE, so it was an obvious choice for us to go for vBlock technology. And again, back to what we wanted to do with this private cloud in terms of making it a true private cloud in the NIST definition way. We wanted it to be self-service, so we needed a portal, we needed a cloud layer, we needed to be able to provide our customers with a way of segmenting up the resources, so vCloud Director featured in that high-level architecture as well. And that's how ultimately I positioned this solution, right? This part was the easy part. Describing how this all hangs together and what components was actually very simple. I did this within a couple of days, right? So the challenges I had, and this is where the warts and all comes into it now, guys, right? This is where I want to be completely honest, is actually taking a solution, transforming it into a service, because I'd never done that kind of thing before, keeping the parents happy. That was actually very, very difficult, because I'll talk about some of the technology that's features in this product, this solution. They might not have all been my first choice, right? Especially the backup, right? So I had to keep the parents happy, and that was a big, big challenge for me. Then, actually what I found was something I didn't expect. And that something was objections internally to what we were doing. So, again, Atos is this mature, old company. I don't want to use the word legacy, but I do, right? And they know that, and that's why Canopy was born, right? But there's a lot of mindset within that organization about how things should be done. People don't like change. There's no one from Atos here, is there? Okay, right, just checking. People don't like change, and actually the biggest challenge I had throughout this whole process was not designing the infrastructure or packaging it or explaining how it's going to work or how we're going to sell it. It was internal bollocks, internal nonsense. And actually I'll talk through some of that. And so some of those challenges were around the automation. Why do we need tooling for automation? Why do customers need to automate? Why can't they just have virtualization? We just want to sell virtualization. Or the cost of components. Why do we need all these different components? And actually, again, the last point on there was to integrate it into back-end services like ticketing and change management and so on, and reporting. Something I had not done before. I started, who was at the last VMware user group? The London one. Yeah, Simon, actually you picked me out for this, right? So I started this presentation off the back of being called out at the London user group, and I got like 5 minutes to present a few slides about some of the challenges and what we'd done to overcome them within Canopy. I presented 3 slides. And this chap asked me in the audience, and he caught me completely off guard. He said, "Why do we need it?" I said, "What do you mean?" "You mean automation?" He said, "Yeah, why do we need it?" And to me, I thought he was joking, right? Yeah, because it kind of sounds like an obvious thing. Why you automate? And I'm going down this route of explaining you automate to save money and blah, 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 blah. Actually, when I thought about it later, I suppose really there are some rules or points you need to think about if you're thinking about a private cloud in terms of the full software-defined data center stack and automation and everything else. And I started to write down some of the questions, do you want to grow and shrink and rapidly expand your infrastructure? If the question is yes, you might need a private cloud software-defined data center. Do you do repetitive tasks like provision workloads, right? But when I say provision workloads, I mean a little bit more than just cloning workloads, right? So that might include things like post-configuration tasks, like adding the workload to Active Directory, or placing it within the change backup scheme, or change management scheme, or well, numerous possibilities. Let me just focus on that one point for a little bit longer. Back in June, I went to see a huge, large book vendor in America, in New York. They begin with M. That's all I can say. And we sat down, we talked about what they wanted to do with private cloud, and they kind of had their first step into doing something similar. They had a self-service portal, they had a vBlock, they didn't have all the components and the automation end-to-end. So I said, what's your problem? What's the pain point? And they said, well, it takes us 13 days to provision a virtual machine. I said, what? 13 days to provision a virtual machine. How is that? How is that so? I said, are you cloning the virtual machine? Yep, the cloning of the virtual machine takes a few minutes. So where's the 13 days come into it? And actually, the 13 days is the post-configuration tasks like adding it to the backup scheduler, adding it to Active Directory, adding it to the change management scheme. It was all about their internal policies and procedures. So I said, well, you know what, we could automate all of that for you and probably slim down that 13 days to a couple of minutes. So, but ultimately, in a nutshell, back to that person's question, you know, why do I need to automate? I suppose it depends. If you put all of that together, it depends if you're large enough. And I don't mean, you know, are you an enterprise customer? I mean, do you have the kind of magnitude in terms of repetitive tasks? Do you need to automate often enough that it's convenient and cost-effective for you to do that, right? If not, then maybe it's not the right way forward, yeah? Now, this is where the DJ bit comes into it. Going back to some of the objections that I have internally within my organization, especially from the Atos folk, I was getting a lot of aggression about what I was doing with this solution, so I started to put some ideas on paper to how I was going to explain the benefits of doing things like automation. And I realized something, and this is just one example, and a stupid example, but I like it. Do you know what I did in the 90s? Annie? Lots of drugs, yeah, there was that as well, but what? Mobile disco, yeah. I thought I was Carl Cox, didn't I? Let's face it, yeah. Yeah, I was Carl Cox, right? I had my decks in my bedroom and a studio that cost me 10 grand that I never used, right? Yeah, and I thought I was Carl Cox. And I actually learned to DJ and mix, right? And mix with vinyl records because back then, we didn't have MP3s and iPads. So it took me kind of a few years to master mixing perfectly like Carl Cox. And if you've never, does anyone mix? Hands up, anyone? Yes, you. So you know how to do it? What's the big challenge of mixing to vinyl? Oh, beat matching, right, yeah? If you want to be the next Carl Cox of this world, yeah, you've got to know how to beat match, sync your BPMs together so you've got these two records that sound like one. That was what DJs do to this day, right? That's their talent. Mastering that can take a long time. And what you're doing is you're continuously firefighting the BPMs. Do you love that animation? It worked great. All right? For those who didn't see it, let me do it again. Right? So what you're doing as a DJ back then in the 90s was you were firefighting the BPMs. And that actually left you little time to actually enhance the sound. If you were a guru like Carl Cox, actually you could, because you'd probably be mixing with about 6 desks and filters and samplers and all sorts of shit, right? But most DJs were firefighting BPMs. Now, for me, for a long time, I felt that, you know, if I was going to modernize, it was going to be cheating, right? Because I found out that actually nowadays you can mix BPMs, mix tunes together, and software will match the BPMs for you and actually do the mixing for you, right? So for a while, I just kind of had this mindset, oh, it's cheating. Where's the talent? It's cheating. You can't do it. No talent in that. You should never do it. It's terrible. So I tried it. And what I realized, actually, was this is really convenient because now you don't have to worry about matching BPMs and mixing BPMs. You can focus on other things to enhance the sound, like working on filters, loops, and, well, okay, this might be alien to you if you've never done this before, but you'll have to trust me, right? So actually, what I realized with this is DJs don't mix anymore. They actually remix, yeah? They're making a new sound. So this was one of the analogies I took to my company. It wasn't the only one. I started talking about BMWs and Toyotas and all kinds of things so they could get it, because only DJs understand this metaphor, right? So, but actually on paper, the numbers look a little bit more like this. This is the reality of it. And especially if you work for a managed services company. Who works for a managed services company or a cloud company? Yeah, okay. So what's an FTE? What? Yeah, you say employee, we say equivalent, right? Same thing. Full-time equivalent. Actually, that means a man or a woman, right? Assigned to that role, to that job. So in traditional managed services, what happens is if you want to manage your customers' services, IT services for them, you have X amount of FTEs that are assigned to X amount of customers. And actually, if you want to onboard more customers, and this is what Atos used to do for many years before Canopy came along and cloud came along, if you wanted to onboard more customers, what did you have to do? Question. More FTEs. Do you know what, Dean? You've been quite interactive. Do you want a free license, buddy? Go on, then. That was terrible, wasn't it? All right, I'll stop being lazy. More FTEs. Okay, so more FTEs. What? Well, actually, that's what happens in reality. You know, yeah, the quality of service goes down for the customer, right? Yeah. And actually, I'm not sure how Atos did it. I think we just got more FTEs, right? What we did was actually consumed the customer's IT team. So we just ended up with more and more and more FTEs. Cloud services approach is a little bit different. When you start to automate and remove a lot of the tasks that an FTE has to do manually, you don't need as many FTEs. Or the amount of FTEs as you grow is not the same as the traditional approach. Do you agree? Well, I'm going to show you some examples why in a second. Actually, in reality, what actually happens is this. The amount of FTEs per one customer is much larger than the traditional approach, and I'll explain why in a second. But when you start to onboard more and more and more customers, the amount of FTEs required is much less than the traditional managed services approach. And this is just an example. It's not a real-world example, but it kind of shows you, the trend between the two different types of services approach. This still didn't mean anything to our guys. They're still not convinced. So I had to give them some numbers, and the numbers looks like this. This was kind of more on their wavelength. This was Atos speak, managed services speak. So I took a few standard, common service requests that are available within our old school traditional services and our cloud services. And it's things like deploying a virtual machine, resetting a password, cloning a virtual machine, adding a virtual machine to the backup schedule. And these were realistic numbers. So you can see the traditional approach, it took 8 hours to do stuff for the next business day. Those were the real SLAs, right? And our SLAs are somewhat different because we can do things in a automated fashion. It's obvious, isn't it? So when that chap asked me, why do I need to automate, this was what was going through my mind. It's just bloody obvious at the end of the day. But again, it depends on how large you are. Now, so I kind of got that point across internally. The next big thing that came across was, why do you need all these components? And let me explain why that question comes about. I haven't really discussed in detail what all the components are in this enterprise private cloud solution, right? But just for your information, we aligned ourselves to vBlock I mentioned, but also the vCloud Enterprise Suite, yeah? The Enterprise Suite, the whole 9 yards, every bit of it, right? So to a salesperson, they'll look at that and say, why do I need the Enterprise Suite? Why can't I have the standard suite? Yeah, and that's the objections I still get to this day. So to kind of get the message across to why we've aligned ourselves to the enterprise suite, I built this matrix. But in a nutshell, you know, you can argue the toss about can we remove SRM all day long. As soon as you do that, you don't have DR capabilities or automation around DR capabilities. You can remove vCloud Director in the portal, and then it's not a private cloud, right? Yeah? These are the kind of arguments I have on a regular basis internally. I think I'm winning now, right? So in a nutshell, vCloud Enterprise Suite equals this. If you remove that and go for a different edition, then you've got no app monitoring, no change visibility, and no DR automation. You could argue that you could replace those tools with third-party ecosystem tools. You can, I can't. So, what actually happened? We bought a vBlock. We designed it, low-level designs. We created runbooks on how that solution was going to be managed and operated, and a few things that came out of that exercise. And the first thing is we found that we have to give our customers 3 different options in terms of how virtual machines and operating systems in those virtual machines are managed, and I'll explain why in a second. We needed to cater for physical servers separately, because that wasn't really on our agenda. And actually, we automated way more than I expected. Way, way, way more, right? I completely underestimated Atos because of the shit I've had over the last 2.5 years. But actually, we did a really good job of automating just about everything, where possible. Now, in terms of the 3 management options, what someone realized was this. Is there a laser pointer? Yeah, there's a laser pointer. Oh, you can't see it on there, never mind. Do you see the SQL workload at the top? What can you tell me about that workload? What's obvious in that picture? Anyone? What? What? What do you mean by that? Oh. You can't have the license, he can. Right. So there's a firewall there. What does that mean? It's isolated, or could be isolated in some form or fashion. The problem that we have is, in terms of the tooling that we were using to do things like patch the operating system, yeah, or run a change audit, for example, on the operating system. It posed a problem for us, and that problem is some virtual machines or virtual appliances can be completely isolated from any network, right? And that's the nature of how we run virtual machines in vCloud Director. So that SQL server could be completely isolated. You might get a scenario where you've got a workload like the CRM workload, which isn't isolated, that runs on top of vCloud Director. And actually, one of the other things that we found is if you want to protect a workload using the SRM technology, then doing it on top of vCloud was not the best way of doing it. So you might have to run that workload, mission-critical workload, like the mail workload in this picture, at the hypervisor level. So we decided, okay, well, we don't want to limit our customers. We'll just provide them with different management options. And dependent on where the virtual machine is or the workload is, depends on how we can effectively manage that workload in terms of change management, patching, and so on and so on. If it's in a completely isolated state, yeah, we refer to that as a self-managed virtual machine. You're on your own, right? If it's, you know, if the requirement is to have that protected with SRM, for example, we might have to run that on the ESX hypervisor outside of vCloud Director. Do you understand? All right, let's keep going. Now, whoa. So I love this diagram. I didn't create it, but I love this diagram. Because to make this work, right, the core of all of this is VCO. That's where all the automation and all the orchestration is done. And these are the dependency relationships for VCO, for all the external components. And this is actually our value, apart from the service itself, but this is our value. You know, we've taken this solution. I told you there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? But we've taken this solution, this service, and we've black boxed it so we can send this to any customer we want. But in reality, if you were going to try and do this yourself, you could do, right? But you've got to think about that picture. Any questions? Any points? Sorry, Dean, say aloud. It could be anything. In fact, actually, my preference is trend. Any trend guys here? Yeah, okay, you use it. It's a good product, right? Yeah? All right. Actually, yes, sir?
Sorry, let's say you're a small business.
Yeah.
About, I don't know, 200 VMs.
Yeah.
You want a cloud consumption model for your private infrastructure, but you don't necessarily need to deploy that much stuff in terms of software. You know, you're quite happy to deploy a VM to a vCenter.
Yeah.
With normal tools.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you still need to be able to show to the business the cost per VM is this.
Yeah.
It's way cheaper than if we were using Amazon or Azure.
Yeah.
You know, to maintain our jobs or whatever.
Yeah.
How would you do that?
So you know what? You know, it goes back to the point that I made a few slides down. Are you large enough, right, for this? That's the whole point of this. But back to your requirement there, I mean, you can do that with tools like ITBM from VMware. You'd have to have kind of a cost-effective solution that meets your budget, and that's the key thing, right? Okay, so, yeah, spaghetti junction, but that's the reality of it, right? That's our value. And so, you know, maybe it might be an idea if you're an end user and you want a private cloud and you're an enterprise and you see the value in running in such a way, because actually it's a win-win, you know, it's a win for the customer because they can run and grow much quicker. It might be an idea that you actually get your managed services company to do this for you, right? So, VCAC, and I'm still using that term, I don't care what VMware say. Right, VCAC is kind of the entry point to this solution. You know, what did we automate through it? Well, we kind of have this automation unless policy. We'll try and automate everything we possibly can. Actually, that steers a lot of the discussions about what technology we use and which route we go down. If we can't automate it because it doesn't have an API or a VCO plugin, for example, then it might not feature in this stack. So we try to automate, and this as much as possible, and here's some examples. Workload provisioning, virtual data center creation. There's even a blueprint for creating blueprints. Yeah, you love that, right? Firewall management, self-service backup. So we even exposed Avamar in the portal as well. So consumers of this private cloud don't need to know about Avamar. They just select whether they want that virtual machine to be included in the backup schedule. The same for SRM as well. We did exactly the same for SRM, and so on and so on. So the portal looks like this. Okay, there's nothing new here. We've seen VCAC for the last year, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But what you'll notice is, actually, we've kind of grouped the blueprints dependent on the management style. So if you were going for a self-managed virtual machine, you'd find a separate blueprint for that. This is a screenshot of the, no pictures please, because this is all IP. No, I'm joking, right, yeah. So I said warts and all, right, yeah. So this is a screenshot from the VCO library that we've created specifically for a lot of these standard service requests. That's what it all boils down to. And actually, just going back a slide, you'll notice the title on this picture, 90% of standard service requests were automated. That is our policy, automation unless. So again, it was really about tying it all together. For us, it's not just about workload deployment, but it's about reducing those 13 days down to a couple of seconds. Now, I don't know if you've noticed anything yet, but I haven't said anything about applications at all at this point, right? other than the applications we're using for services. Applications is actually a different service. We stop at the virtual machine level. You know, the first attempt at this is our first version at SDDC, we decided to stop at the container. Here is an example of the workflow required to include any change that's happened on the system in the CMDB. So anytime anything occurs within the automation, this workflow loops around and adds whatever's been done, the change, into the system, into the audit. So that was how we kind of got that private cloud off the ground. And actually, I'm very proud. It took us a long time, but now we start to see some customers on there, big customers. And again, I can't do this because it's not a sales pitch. But for us, the next big thing is, you know, having spoken to customers and so on, these are some of the things, touch points, feedbacks that we get from customers and that are steering the next phase of this enterprise private cloud. Clients are asking for integration with other clouds. You know, I'm a big VMware fan and a big VMware pro, and I'll always go VMware, regardless. But I'm not the customer at the end of the day. Customers are asking for an Amazon-esque experience. And actually, when I first heard that, I'm not sure I 100% knew what it meant until I got really speaking to a customer. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? What is an Amazon-esque experience? See, what? Easy. So when I first heard that, I kind of thought the customer was asking for an AWS experience, right? And I thought, well, it's bloody identical in a lot of ways what VCAC is doing. Yes, 5 minutes. 1 minute, shit. Okay, let's keep going. All right, in a nutshell, the future for the solution is we need to kind of expand our horizons, and we're actually adding a lot more tooling to do things like integrate other clouds, integrate billing mechanisms, integrate PaaS solutions, and so on. And that solution right now is kind of in an early beta. It's called Canopy Enterprise Platform. And again, not a sales pitch, but I wanted to kind of show you what as Amazon-esque experience looks like. And this is a screenshot from it. It's simplified, as this gentleman said. It's dumbed down. Yeah, it's about making it really, really easy to consume whilst also attaching it to billing capabilities and so on and so on. VCAC is a brilliant technical portal, and VCAC will always be there, in my opinion, for what it does. However, in terms of like the very super high-level stuff, you might need something else on top of that. So the next thing for us to enhance this, the kind of more relevant future is about software-defined physicals. Actually, we've just made that a reality, and we want to take you know, the software-defined data center to the next step and start including things like NSX and so on and so on. So, based on the fact that I only had 1 minute, is there any last questions? Yes, sir. Phil, go. For sure, yeah. And we also have shared clouds and so on, yeah. Yeah, and private clouds, on-premise, off-premise, so on. Again, I was trying to not make it a sales pitch, right, yeah. Phil, have one of them. I think everyone's coming back in for the keynote.
What's your plan for vCloud Director?
Displacement. Yeah, that's a good question. What's our plan for vCloud Director displacement? Well, we'll have to handle it as it comes, right, yeah? I mean, a lot of the functions that we'd need from vCloud Director kind of there in VCAC in some capacity, but we'll just play along with the game. Yes, sir? Capacity management, you mean?
I mean, assessing the size of the workload before you start charging money for where you're going to put it.
This solution's purely about private cloud, right? So that investment's already been made up front, yeah? If the discussion was about shared cloud, we'd be having a different discussion. Any other questions?
What's with the dinosaur pigs?
So, yeah, did you not get that? What's with the dinosaur pics? It's Atos. Guys, anyone who listened to me, thank you so much, right? I was supposed to dish out this goodie bag here. Come and see me later on, because everyone else is piling into the room, right, yeah? I remember all your faces, okay? Right, yeah? So, if there's no last questions, thank you so much, because I can see everyone else piling in. Any last questions? Cool, thank you.